Hi everyone, I just wanted to make a quick video. I had been watching this morning Nicholas Bielik's video on the overview of the various early editions of Dungeons and Dragons, and he made an interesting point at the end of his video, which I recommend everyone watch, and I'll put a link to it in the description below, that the games of Dungeons and Dragons that we got after 2000, the year 2000, so this is like third edition and forward, although they were named Dungeons and Dragons, they were actually inheritors not of the what's the community tends to call basic Dungeons and Dragons or original Dungeons and Dragons, but they were inheritors of the advanced D&D line, in terms of their sort of the legacy of their rules. And there's an interesting point there I just wanted to add to his discussion. I know his video is now a few years old, so I don't know if Nicholas will respond at all to this at this point, but there's a comment that should be made there that the original game that started way back with the wood grain box in 1974 really ended sometime in the 90s, and I just want to make a quick video to explain what I mean by that. I've made the point elsewhere, not necessarily on YouTube, but on forums and other websites. But I thought it's kind of it's not commonly appreciated why the significance of that. So let me take you as quickly as I can through a little history. This is not the first printing of the basic D&D box set. This is actually a fifth printing, but it will be sufficient to make the point. The original game came out in 1974 and was credited Gygax and Arneson, as you see here on the cover, and was really the product of both of their labors. I know Gary did a lot of the writing and editing, and a lot of the original idea for the premise came from Dave. So they did different kinds of works, but are equally credited and worked together through letters and correspondences and notes and things like that to produce this game. So this is the original Dungeons and Dragons, and it's very much a product of both Gygax and Arneson. What happened to this game is this stayed actually in print for a long time, and TSR was selling them into the 80s, eventually calling it sort of the collector's set. So they had many of these eventually produced in all the printings, and at the end they were really just trying to get rid of them because it was recognized that this wasn't the best introduction to the game. And at the time, in the late 70s, mid to late 70s, Gary was writing a new product, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And so an interim product was imagined. This is John Eric Holmes' edit of the Dungeons and Dragons rules, covering the first through third level. And John approached Gary and said, I had been playing this with my son and his friends, and there was it wasn't the clearest set of rules if you don't have someone to walk you into them and explain how the game is meant to work. Why don't I do a more accessible edit of the rules? And at the time, this sounded like a great idea to TSR, to Gary, as an entryway both potentially into the white box, the box that was just on the screen, as well as halfway through the writing of this, Gary sort of started filtering in ideas to Holmes about the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons game. So this was actually seen as sort of an introduction to both of these products. This is typically, just a point here, this is typically called the first set of basic D&D within the community, but as you see, the game was never called basic D&D. It was always Dungeons and Dragons basic set. But there was not planned any set after this, any box set. This was supposed to simply be an introduction to the other products. In 1979, as Gary was coming out with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, got one of those somewhere here. So he started to release the game first as a monster manual, I think in 77, same year as the Holmes box set. And 78, I believe, came the Player's Handbook. These are not first printing, so you use your imagination. And then the Dungeons Master Guide, which really, this probably should have come first, because you cannot play the game without this book. As Nicholas points out in his video, it has the attack tables and things like that in it. But this came out in 1979, and TSR, Gary Gygax, made the argument that this game, the advanced D&D game, was sufficiently different that TSR did not owe royalties to Dave Arneson. Dave Arneson sued, and what was decided in a court settlement, or maybe it was out of court settlement, I forget, but Dave would continue to receive a small number of royalties, I think 2.5% for advanced D&D, which was a sufficient, quite a healthy income actually, and continue to receive the normal traditional royalties on Dungeons and Dragons product, which meant that legally TSR had to continue publishing the Dungeons and Dragons game, in addition to the advanced line. And if they didn't, if the game went out of production and out of stock for over a year or two, the rights would revert to Dave Arneson, and he would be able to make his claims again. So to solve that in 1981, when the settlement was made, this is what they came out with. This is the first iteration of a separate line of what's called in the community basic Dungeons and Dragons, but is never called that on the box set. Sometimes in the rule books will refer to that. So this was the 1981, sometimes called the BX set, based on the pagination has a B or an X inside the rule book to remind you what book you're in. Mainly because these rules, let me dig in here. These rules they came hole punched, and you were meant to probably just remove the covers and put them in some sort of a 3-ring binder. I don't know if many people did that, but quickly flipping through, you can see at the bottom, oh, I'm not in the basic rules, I'm in the expert rules, I need to go turn back a few pages or whatever. And another interesting point, let's make another observation about dice while we're at it, just because I love the history of the dice in the sets. The home set originally came with these waxy dice from, I believe they're made in Hong Kong or something like that, and due to various production problems, they decided to make TSR decided to make their own in-house dice, the dice that are typically associated with the BX Mulvey Cookmarsh sets. These are actually in this box. I opened both of these boxes from Shrink years ago. I have another set that I use for play, so I never did anything with them. That's why they're in kind of perfect condition. But just to point out that the later BX boxes, typically known as Beckme dice, they're slightly subtly different than the earlier Moldvade Cookmarsh dice. That set was followed on by the Beckme rules. I don't have a copy of the Beckme rules, but I can, let's see, somewhere I have, yeah, the Beckme rules, which were encompassed in 1991 with this set. So between 83 and 1990 or so, there was a 5-box set called Basic Expert Companion Masters and Mortals, which were the first 4 boxes were eventually compiled into this, and the last box was really updated and changed quite a bit and released as another box set for this line. But the kind of key feature of Beckme, and you can, maybe I can look it up if there's interest. There's a great interview with Frank Mentzer, the editor of the Beckme set, where he talks about the development of the game and the legalities surrounding it. And he describes that, a lot of players wanted elements of the advanced D&D game to be imported into Beckme, and some were, but there were core ideas of the basic D&D line that had to legally remain distinct from AD&D to maintain this relationship, this legal agreement with Arneson. And these are things like race as class, so you don't have a dwarven fighter, it's just a dwarf, for example. You just play an elf, for example. And other things. He talks about it a little bit in the video. So the point to be made there is that this game legally had to maintain certain core features that made it recognizable from the original white box. Well, this version of the game went through many printings. It was actually preceded by my favorite release of the basic rules, which is the big black box, the new easy to master D&D game, which is in a big, it's so big it can't even fit in the camera, board game sized box, like a Monopoly box, for example. And because they had to legally keep producing it to maintain their rights, that was followed by a few, in some ways inferior, but still quite nice box sets, now renamed the Classic D&D game. So again, the order from the 90s onward was the black box in 91. About 6 months later, the Rules Cyclopedia came out, which was an expansion to the black box, basically. It took the rules higher than 5th level. And then the first through 5th level box sets were kept in print in smaller kind of bookcase style boxes. So this was the 15th, I believe this is 15th print. You can check on SAM or wherever. I'm not sure if SAM has it, maybe tsrarchive.com. And the 16th and 17th prints look like this. But otherwise, the contents of these boxes is largely the same as the new Easy to Master game. That carries us through to 1996 or so. In 1997, something rather dramatic happened. TSR was in financial difficulties, and another company was flush with money, and that company was Wizards of the Coast, who had produced, since I want to say 93 or 94, produced the Magic the Gathering game, which was huge and made enormous amounts of money for Wizards of the Coast. And in 97, the CEO of the company, Peter Adkison, decided to go on a shopping spree, and he bought up not only TSR, the entire company, but he also bought up Five Rings Publishing, that produced another game that I loved in the 90s, Legend of the Five Rings, and I think they also purchased that year the Pokemon CCG. I don't know about L5R, but the other two licenses went on to make lots and lots of money for for Wizards of the Coast, and were quite successful. But for me, this is sort of a sad moment because a lot of things also changed. Now, with D&D, Wizards of the Coast kept in production the kind of TSR-style publications, and indeed, second edition, right through to 99-2000 era. It's kind of petering out in early 2000. In fact, this is the last box set released for D&D. And this is, you would think from the logo that maybe this is either basic Dungeons and Dragons, or maybe this is 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons. The copyright on the back says 1999, so, maybe 3rd edition. But no, this is a TSR product. Let's see if I get that in the camera. No, there we go. TSR Silver Anniversary, you see there. And this, if you looked in the rulebook, this is actually straight up 2nd edition. It's simplified greatly. For example, you only have one saving throw. You see there at the bottom. One saving throw. Things like that. But it is otherwise the 2nd edition rules. So what had happened was Peter Adkison decided, this is my assumption, and there are books written on the subject, which I'll give you a more scholarly account, but my memory of the situation is that Peter Adkison felt that the advanced moniker would scare away new players, which, yeah, makes sense. And so he decided to drop it, and to do that, to go back to just the D&D logo, he actually approached Dave Arneson, as well as others, and gave them a fat payout to relinquish their rights to royalties and the intellectual property of the D&D line. So he paid them a lot of money. They said, okay, we give up our claim, and he was allowed to do what he wanted with the line, and he renamed it Dungeons and Dragons. However, if you look at D&D from 2000 onward, it is very much advanced Dungeons and Dragons based. You have separations between races and classes. If you look at the hit dice of the character classes and the kinds of races that characters can play, the monsters and magic items and the way that spells work, there's just a lot there to indicate how it is really a derivative of the advanced Dungeons and Dragons game. And that makes a lot of sense when you think about 3rd edition. It is following after what? After 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It wouldn't make any sense to use the name 3rd edition otherwise. The original D&D game that first came out in 1974, the part of the series of games that was directly intentionally derived from that and had to legally stay within the bounds of what's recognizably original D&D, that line ended, I want to say, in 96 or 97 with the very last printings of that classic D&D box set. This is, I think, an interesting point because often there's this assumption that there's this clear continuity between various versions of Dungeons and Dragons, but really what we have today are the inheritors of the advanced D&D line. And if you wanted to play a game that was very conspicuously derived from the original game, I think you would actually be looking for something like this. I don't actually play a lot of D&D right now. I have sort of a love-hate relationship with the game, and we could talk about that. But I think that's something that is often underappreciated, and I thought it would be interesting to make a video explaining sort of the various derivations of Dungeons and Dragons before the year 2000 and from 2000 onward, what are the origins of these sort of concepts. And so just a little channel update to wrap up, particularly about the Mega Traveler video series. What happened was I had gotten sick for a week and a half or so and was out of action. And when I came back to it, I did make a couple more episodes, but by that time I looked and there wasn't really a lot of response to the Mega Traveler video series. If you would like to see that series continue, I certainly can upload the two episodes I did record and even continue it if there's interest. But just to give an account for what happened. So I think that's it. If you have any comments or questions or would like to see more content like this, please put your thoughts down in the comment section below, and we can certainly do something like that. All right, thanks very much. Take care.